My name is Sloane Sterling. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a senior architectural designer. But to my father, I was never a professional. I was never an adult. To him, I was just a piece of property he hadn't finished breaking yet. Last Thanksgiving, the air in our dining room didn't smell like turkey and cinnamon. It smelled like fear. 30 of our relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, and business associates, were packed around a mahogany table that cost more than my first car. My father, Richard, stood at the head of the table, his wine glass raised like a scepter. I decided that was the moment. I had spent years wondering why my late grandmother, the woman who actually built the Sterling fortune, had left me a sealed envelope instead of a mention in the public will. "Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the hammer strike of my heart. "I want to talk about Grandma's private estate. What exactly was left to me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Richard didn't blink. He just set his glass down with a slow, deliberate clink that felt like a guillotine blade dropping. "Sloane," he said, his voice dripping with a fake paternal pity that made my skin crawl. "We've discussed this. You aren't mature enough to handle her legacy. In fact, your tone right now proves it." He looked around the room, catching the eyes of his cronies. "Since you want to act like a petulant child in front of our guests, I'm going to treat you like one. You're grounded. No phone, no car keys, and you are confined to your room until I decide otherwise. Do I make myself clear?" A ripple of laughter started at the far end of the table. My cousin Mark snickered. My own mother looked at her plate, too terrified to speak. My face burned. Not with shame, but with a white-hot tectonic rage. I could feel my pulse thumping in my very teeth. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I looked him dead in the eye, the man who thought he owned my future, and whispered 2 words. "All right." The laughter grew louder. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd broken me for the last time. "Hold on. Before we get into the real stuff, I want to know. What are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? Are you at work? Making dinner? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments." The next morning, at precisely 7 a.m., I heard his heavy footsteps. He knocked on my bedroom door, a smug, triumphant smirk already plastered on his face. "I hope you've finally learned your place," he called out, pushing the door open without waiting. The smirk died instantly. The room was stripped bare. No clothes in the closet, no suitcases, no posters on the walls, and most importantly, no me. I had been gone for 5 hours. Before he could even reach for his phone to roar at me through the receiver, the heavy brass doorbell downstairs echoed through the empty house. Richard marched to the front door, likely expecting me to be standing there, shivering and begging for forgiveness. Instead, he pulled the door open to find Mr. Harrison, the family's senior legal counsel for 40 years. Mr. Harrison wasn't smiling. His hands were literally trembling as he clutched a leather briefcase, a briefcase containing documents my father never knew existed. Documents that were about to turn his entire world into a pile of ash. "Richard," the lawyer whispered, his face pale. "We need to talk. Now. It's about the house, and it's about Sloane." My father's grip on the door tightened until his knuckles turned white. He didn't know it yet, but the child he just grounded now technically owned the floor he was standing on. Richard Sterling didn't just lose his temper. He lost his breath. He stared at the leather briefcase in Mr. Harrison's hand as if it were a ticking time bomb. And in a way, it was. "What are you doing here, Bill?" My father spat, his voice regaining that jagged, authoritative edge. "It's 7 in the morning. If Sloane called you to whine about her punishment, you can turn around right now. I'm her father. My word is final." Mr. Harrison didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just looked past my father into the grand foyer, the one with the Italian marble and the vaulted ceilings. "Richard," the lawyer said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper, I'm not here because Sloane called me. I'm here because your mother's final letter of intent triggered at midnight. The moment Sloane turned 28 and you attempted to restrict her personal or financial liberty, a dormant clause in the Sterling Trust was activated. My father let out a sharp, mocking bark of a laugh. Restricted her liberty? I grounded her. It's a family matter. Don't tell me my mother wrote a will that dictates how I discipline my own daughter. She didn't just dictate it, Richard, Mr. Harrison said, finally stepping over the threshold without being invited. She anticipated it. The lawyer walked straight to the massive dining table, the scene of my public humiliation just hours before, and clicked open the brass latches of his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of vellum paper, stamped with the seal of the state's highest probate court. While you were busy playing the patriarch last night, Harrison continued, I was processing the transfer of titles. You see, your mother knew exactly who you were. She knew that the moment she passed, you would try to absorb her private holdings and treat Sloane like a subordinate rather than a successor. My father's face went from a flush of anger to a sickly pale gray. What are you talking about? Successor to what? I run Sterling Development. I own this house. I own the firm. Mr. Harrison pulled out a single gold-embossed document and slid it across the mahogany wood. Actually, the lawyer said, you don't. This house, and the 40% controlling interest in Sterling Development that belonged to your mother, was never yours. You were merely a tenant in occupancy and a temporary steward. My father snatched the paper, his eyes darting across the legalese. I know that look. It's the look of a man realizing the floor beneath him isn't solid ground. It's a trapdoor. The clause is simple, Harrison explained, his voice gaining a cold, professional strength. If you ever attempted to use your position to infringe upon the autonomy of the named heir, Sloane, all stewardship rights would immediately revoke and vest in her. Effective as of 12:01 a.m. today. My father looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Where is she? Where is that brat? She's at my office, Harrison said. And she's already signed the paperwork. She isn't just your daughter anymore, Richard. She's your landlord. And as of 10 minutes ago, she's also your boss. The silence that followed was so heavy, it felt like the walls were closing in. My father looked at the empty chair where I had sat the night before, the chair where everyone had laughed at me. But I wasn't there to be laughed at. I was already miles away, sitting in a glass-walled office, holding a pen that had more power than his loudest shout. I wasn't just taking my life back. I was taking everything he had ever used to make me feel small. And I was just getting started. My father stared at the golden seal on the document as if it were a poisonous spider. His chest heaved, his face shifting from a ghostly pale to a dangerous bruised purple. This is a joke, he choked out, his voice cracking like dry wood. A senile old woman's rambling. You really think a judge is going to let a 28-year-old girl seize a multi-million-dollar real estate firm because I told her she couldn't go out for the night? Bill, you've lost your mind. Mr. Harrison didn't blink. He pulled a small, silver digital recorder from his pocket and placed it on the table. He pressed play. A voice filled the room. It was Grandma Beatrice. Even through the speakers, her voice held the authority of a woman who had built an empire from nothing while the men around her were still playing with blocks. Richard, the recording began. If you are hearing this, it means you have finally done exactly what I feared. You've mistaken cruelty for leadership. You've mistaken Sloane's silence for weakness. I left the Sterling Trust with a very specific tripwire. I knew you'd try to crush her spirit the moment I wasn't there to shield her. By grounding her, by publicly attempting to strip her of her dignity and her movement, you have officially triggered the incompetency clause. You are no longer the CEO. You are a guest in my house, and Sloane is the host. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was even louder than the voice. My father's hand began to shake. She trapped me, he whispered. That old woman trapped me from the grave. She didn't trap you, Richard, Harrison said, his voice cold. She gave you a choice. You could have treated your daughter like a partner. You chose to treat her like a prisoner. And in this state, the Sterling clause is ironclad. It's a performance-based trust. You failed the performance. But here's the thing about my father. He's a predator. And predators don't just roll over when they're cornered. They lash out. He grabbed the documents, crumpled them into a ball, and threw them at the lawyer's face. Get out. Get out of my house. I'll fire you. I'll sue Sloane until she's living in a tent. I am the chairman of the board. Actually, Harrison said, standing up and straightening his tie with a terrifyingly calm precision. You were the chairman. As of 8 a.m., the board has been notified of the transition. And as for this being your house, the lawyer gestured toward the window. 2 black SUVs were pulling into the long, winding driveway. 4 men in suits stepped out. They weren't lawyers. They were private security, the kind you hire when you're expecting a messy eviction. My father's eyes went wide. He ran to the window, his breath fogging the glass. What is this? Who are they? They are here to escort you from the premises, Richard, Harrison said. Sloane has requested a 24-hour cooling-off period. She's granted you exactly 30 minutes to pack a single suitcase. Everything else, the cars, the art, the wine cellar, belongs to the trust now. My father turned around, his eyes wild, looking for my mother. She was standing in the doorway, her eyes red from crying. Martha, tell them they can't do this. My mother looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. She didn't say a word. She just handed him an empty suitcase she had pulled from the attic. The man who had just spent 30 years commanding everyone's life was suddenly standing in a room full of people who wouldn't even look him in the eye. But as he started to scream, his phone chimed. A text message. From me. He fumbled for his pocket, his fingers clumsy with rage. He opened the message. It was a photo of the skyscraper where our headquarters were located, and standing right in front of the gold-lettered Sterling sign was me. I wasn't wearing the sweater I had on at Thanksgiving. I was wearing a sharp, charcoal gray power suit, and in my hand, I wasn't holding a wine glass. I was holding his key card. The text underneath the photo said, Don't worry, Dad. I've already changed the locks at the office. Your 9 a.m. meeting, I'm taking it for you. He let out a guttural roar of fury, but he was interrupted by a heavy knock on the front door. The security team was here, and the real nightmare for Richard Sterling was only just beginning, because he didn't realize that the house and the company weren't the only things Grandma Beatrice had hidden from him. There was a secret in those files, a secret that would make him wish he had just stayed in bed that Thanksgiving morning. My father didn't just walk out, he was led out. Watching Richard Sterling, the man who once commanded rooms with a single clearing of his throat, being escorted down his own driveway by 2 security guards was like watching a mountain crumble. He was still in his silk bathrobe, clutching a single leather suitcase he'd packed in a blind, shaking frenzy. This isn't over, Sloane, he screamed at the security camera mounted above the door, knowing I was watching the feed from my phone. I built this. You're just a little girl playing dress-up in my office. But I wasn't playing. At 9:05 a.m., I stepped into the boardroom of Sterling Development. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and anxiety. 7 board members, men who had spent the last decade nodding in agreement with my father's every whim, sat frozen. I didn't sit in the chair at the end of the table. Not yet. I stood. Gentlemen, I said, my voice projecting a calm I didn't entirely feel. As of this morning, Richard Sterling has been removed from his position as chairman and CEO due to the activation of the matriarch's succession clause. You've all received the legal briefs from Mr. Harrison. Old Man Miller, a guy who had been my father's golf partner for 20 years, cleared his throat. Now hold on, Sloane. We appreciate your enthusiasm, but your father is the face of this company. We have a $300 million development deal with the city closing on Friday. You can't just walk in here and take the wheel of a moving ship. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the glass table. The ship isn't moving, Mr. Miller. It's sinking. And my father was the one who drilled the holes. I opened my laptop and projected a spreadsheet onto the massive wall-size screen. The numbers weren't green. They were a bleeding, angry red. For the last 3 years, my father hasn't been developing properties, I said, my voice turning cold. He's been over-leveraging the Sterling Trust to cover personal gambling debts and a series of failed offshore investments that weren't authorized by this board. He didn't want me to see Grandma's will because the will required a full forensic audit of the company's assets upon her death. The room went deathly silent. My father hadn't just been a bully. He'd been a thief. He wasn't protecting his legacy. He was hiding his crimes. He grounded me at Thanksgiving, I continued. Not because I was disobedient, but because I asked the one question that threatened his cover. He thought if he could keep me locked in my room, he could delay the lawyer long enough to move the last of the liquid assets. I saw Miller's face go pale. Are you saying the city deal is compromised? I'm saying the city deal is a front for a money laundering scheme my father started 6 months ago, I replied. And if we don't fix it in the next 48 hours, the Sterling name won't be on skyscrapers. It'll be on an indictment. I finally sat down in the chairman's chair. It felt cold. Now, I said, looking at each of them, you can either help me save what's left of my grandmother's empire, or you can go down with the man who's currently standing on a sidewalk in his bathrobe. Which is it? Before anyone could answer, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a call from a restricted number. I knew it was him. I put it on speaker. Sloane, my father's voice hissed, sounding ragged and desperate. Check the safe in my home office, the small one behind the painting. If you go to the police, I'm taking your mother down with me. She signed the papers, Sloane. She's just as guilty as I am. The board members gasped. My heart skipped a beat. He was using my own mother as a human shield. But what he didn't know was that Grandma Beatrice had one more secret waiting in that briefcase. The boardroom felt like an oxygen-deprived chamber. My father's voice, distorted through the speakerphone, hung in the air like a lethal vapor. She signed the papers, Sloane. She's just as guilty as I am. I looked at the board members. Their faces were a map of terror and indecision. If my mother, the gentle, quiet Martha Sterling, was implicated in a multi-million-dollar fraud, the Sterling brand wouldn't just be tarnished. It would be radioactive. Dad, I said, my voice barely a whisper but cutting through the tension. You're bluffing. Mom doesn't even know how to log into the corporate portal. She doesn't need to log in to sign a power of attorney, Sloane, he roared, followed by a wet, hacking laugh. Check the Blue Harbor filings. Her signature is on every single wire transfer. If I go to prison, she's sharing the cell next to me. Is that the justice you wanted? The line went dead. I felt a cold sweat prickling my hairline. I looked at Mr. Harrison, who was standing by the door. He wasn't looking at the board. He was looking at me with an expression of profound sadness. Is it true, Bill? I asked. Harrison sighed, reached into his briefcase, and pulled out a separate, smaller folder. This one wasn't vellum or gold embossed. It was plain manila. Your father has been using a life interest clause to force your mother's hand for years, Sloane. He told her if she didn't sign those documents, he would liquidate the trust and leave her family's estate in Europe bankrupt. She did it to protect her sisters. She did it for you. The board members started whispering. We can't have this, Miller stammered. If the feds see Martha's name on those transfers, the city deal is dead by noon. Sloane, you have to bury this. We have to bring Richard back in to clean the books. I stood up so fast my chair hit the wall with a crack. Bring him back? The man who just threatened to throw his own wife under a bus to save his skin? No. Then what's the move? Miller challenged. You're the boss now. Fix it. I grabbed my laptop and headed for the door. I'm going to that safe, I said over my shoulder. And Bill, call the forensic team. We aren't burying anything. We're digging it all up. I raced back to the house I now legally owned but felt like a crime scene. I bypassed the security guards and ran straight to my father's private study. The smell of his expensive cigars still lingered in the curtains. I moved the hideous oil painting of the English countryside. There it was, a small biometric safe. He thought he was so smart. He thought, because he changed the code every month, I could never get in. But Richard Sterling's greatest flaw was his ego. He never thought I was worth watching. He didn't know that when I was 16, I had installed a tiny pinhole camera in the ceiling crown molding just to see where he hid the scotch he didn't want Mom to find. I punched in the code, 11/23/95, the date of his first big land deal, the day he decided money was more important than people. The safe clicked open. Inside wasn't just money. It was a stack of ledgers, 3 burner phones, and a handwritten letter addressed to me, dated 5 years ago. I picked up the letter, my hands shaking. But as I opened it, a small silver key fell out. It wasn't a house key or a car key. It was a key to a safety deposit box at a bank that didn't exist anymore. Or so I thought. Suddenly, the lights in the study flickered and died. In the reflection of the glass cabinets, I saw a shadow move in the hallway. "I told you to stay in your room, Sloane," a voice growled. My father hadn't left. He had circled back, and he wasn't in his bathrobe anymore. The darkness in the study was absolute, save for the pale moonlight filtering through the heavy velvet curtains. My heart wasn't just beating. It was trying to escape my ribs. "Dad?" I whispered, my hand closing tight around the silver key and the manila folder. "You always were the curious one." His voice drifted from the shadows. Richard Sterling stepped into the sliver of light. He had changed into a dark tactical jacket. Gone was the blustering patriarch from the dinner table. In his place was a man who looked like he had nothing left to lose. Grandma Beatrice thought she was so clever, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for her favorite little architect. He took a step toward the desk. I backed away, my heels clicking against the hardwood, a sound that felt like a countdown. "The board is terrified, Sloane," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous purr. "They know that if those ledgers in your hand go to the DA, every single one of them goes to federal prison for RICO violations. You aren't just destroying me. You're destroying the lives of 30 families." "They knew what you were doing," I snapped, finding my voice. "And so did you. You didn't just over-leverage the trust. You stole from the pension funds of the construction workers, didn't you?" He stopped. The silence was his confession. "I did what I had to do to keep the Sterling name on top," he hissed. "Now give me the folder and the key. We're going to walk out of here. I'm going to tell the board there was a clerical error, and you're going to take a long, expensive vacation to Europe, starting tonight." He reached out his hand. He actually expected me to obey. Even now, after everything, he thought the grounding was still in effect. "No," I said. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. "No," he repeated, his eyes narrowing. "Sloane, don't be a martyr. You think the lawyer can protect you? Harrison is an old man. He's loyal to a ghost. I'm the one who's alive. I'm the one who can make sure your mother spends her golden years in a penthouse instead of a jumpsuit. You used her, Dad. You used her as a human shield because you're a coward." I held the folder higher. "And as for the board, they aren't loyal to you. They're loyal to whoever has the biggest stick. Right now, that's me." I lunged for the heavy brass lamp on the desk, but he was faster. He grabbed my wrist, his grip like a vice. "Give it to me," he growled. But then the lights didn't just flicker. They slammed back on. The study door swung open, and it wasn't the security guards. It was my mother. She was holding a small, old-fashioned revolver, the one Grandma Beatrice used to keep in her nightstand. Her hand was shaking, but her eyes were like flint. "Let her go, Richard. my mother said. Her voice didn't tremble, not even a little. My father froze. He looked at his wife, the woman he had spent 30 years belittling, and he laughed, a genuine mocking laugh. Martha, you don't even know how to take the safety off that thing. I do, I whispered, wrenching my arm free, because Grandma taught me, and she taught Mom too. My mother stepped into the room, her gaze fixed on the man she had once loved. I've spent 24 hours listening to you threaten our daughter. I've spent 20 years signing papers I didn't understand because I was afraid of your temper. But last night, when you laughed at her in front of everyone, I realized I wasn't afraid of you anymore. I was just disgusted. She looked at me. Run, Sloane. Get to the bank. I'll stay here with the chairman. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the folder, bolted past my father, and ran for the stairs. I could hear him roaring behind me, but I didn't look back. I hit the driveway, jumped into my car, and floored it. But as I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. A black sedan was already idling at the end of the driveway. As soon as I cleared the gates, its headlights snapped on. My father wasn't working alone. And the secret in the safety deposit box? It wasn't just about money. It was about a person my father had spent 28 years trying to erase. The tires of my SUV screamed as I tore onto the main road, the silver key biting into my palm. Behind me, the black sedan was a predatory shadow, matching my every turn with terrifying precision. My father had always talked about the Sterling Circle, a group of elite fixers who made problems disappear. I realized now that I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a problem. I dialed Mr. Harrison on the hands-free. Bill, my father's people are on me. I'm heading to the old First National branch on 5th. Why did Grandma have a key to a defunct bank? It's not defunct, Sloane. Harrison's voice crackled, sounding breathless. It's private. It's where the founding families keep what they don't want the IRS or their heirs to find. Listen to me. Don't look at the files until you're inside the vault. And Sloane, your father isn't chasing you for the money. Then what is he chasing me for? I yelled, swerving to avoid a delivery truck. The truth about your birth, Harrison whispered. The phone line went dead. My stomach dropped. The truth about my birth? I was a Sterling. I had the Sterling jawline, the Sterling architectural mind. I reached the bank, a windowless granite fortress, and slammed on the brakes. I sprinted for the heavy bronze doors just as the black sedan screeched to a halt behind me. 2 men in gray suits stepped out, but they were too late. The bank's overnight security, alerted by Harrison, pulled me inside and bolted the doors. The silence of the bank was eerie. A thin, elderly clerk led me down a spiral staircase into the belly of the building. The air grew colder, smelling of ozone and old paper. We stopped at a wall of small stainless steel lockers. Box 812, the clerk said, stepping back. I inserted the silver key. It turned with a heavy, satisfying thud. Inside was a single weathered leather journal and a birth certificate. I opened the document, expecting to see my father's name. But the space for father was blank, and under mother, it didn't say Martha Sterling. It said Elena Vane. My breath hitched. Elena Vane was the woman my father had accidentally forced out of the company 30 years ago. His primary rival, the woman who had almost beaten him to the CEO chair. The story was that she had disappeared after a nervous breakdown. I opened the journal. The first page was dated the week before I was born. Richard thinks he can hide the child. He thinks he can pay me to vanish. But he forgot one thing. I designed the foundation of his empire, and I've hidden the detonator where only our daughter will find it. I flipped to the back of the book. There were no more words, only blueprints. But they weren't for a building. They were blueprints for a digital backdoor into every Sterling account globally. A kill switch. My father hadn't grounded me to hide his debt. He had grounded me because I was turning 28, the exact age Elena Vane was when he stole the company from her. The age Grandma Beatrice's trust dictated I would receive this key. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the top of the stairs. The heavy vault door started to groan. "Sloane!" My father's voice boomed through the vents, distorted and haunting. "Open the box, give me the journal, and I'll tell you where she is. I'll take you to your real mother." He was lying. I knew it in my gut. He didn't want to reunite me with Elena. He wanted to bury the last witness to his original sin. I looked at the blueprints. My eyes, trained in architecture, saw something the lawyer hadn't. These weren't just bank accounts. These were coordinates. My real mother wasn't in Europe. She was closer than anyone knew. And she had been waiting 28 years for me to act like a child so I could finally find her. The vault door groaned, a sound of metal screaming against metal. My father was using a bypass code he must have held onto for decades. I had seconds. I looked at the blueprints again. My architectural training kicked in, filtering out the noise. These weren't just bank coordinates. They were structural overlays of the Sterling estate, the very house I had grown up in. But there was a room marked in red that didn't exist on any floor plan I had ever studied. It was nestled behind the wine cellar, encased in 2 feet of reinforced concrete. "Sloane!" My father's voice was closer now, echoing off the marble walls of the lobby. "Don't believe the lies in that book. Elena was unstable. I protected you from her." "You didn't protect me," I shouted back, my voice trembling with a new, icy clarity. "You protected your throne." I shoved the journal and the birth certificate into my jacket. I couldn't go out the front. I looked at the clerk, who was trembling in the corner. "The service tunnel," I whispered. "Where does it lead?" The old man pointed toward a small, heavy door behind the safe deposit tiers. "The subway ventilation shaft, but it hasn't been used in years." "Perfect," I said. I threw my weight against the door. It swung open into a dark, damp tunnel that smelled of iron and old rain. I bolted into the darkness just as the main vault door hissed open. I heard the heavy thud of my father's boots hitting the floor. "Find her!" he roared to his men. "And bring me that book." I ran until my lungs burned. I navigated the maze of the city's underbelly, using the GPS on my phone to guide me back toward the estate. My father thought I was running away. He thought I would hide in some hotel. He never expected me to go back to the lion's den. I arrived at the gates of the Sterling estate an hour later. The house was dark, save for a single light in the kitchen. My mother, or the woman I had called Mom for 28 years, was gone. The security guards were gone, likely sent to help my father hunt me down. I slipped through the servants' entrance and headed straight for the basement. I reached the wine cellar. I moved the racks of vintage Bordeaux, my fingers searching for the seam in the concrete. I found it, a small, recessed biometric scanner identical to the one in the safe. I pressed my thumb against the glass. Access granted. The wall didn't just open, it retracted with a hydraulic hiss. I stepped inside. It wasn't a dungeon. It was a high-tech laboratory and archives room. Monitors lined the walls, scrolling through the live financial data of Sterling development. And in the center of the room, sitting in a high-backed ergonomic chair, was a woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that matched mine exactly. She looked up, a faint, sad smile playing on her lips. "You're late, Sloane," Elena Vane said. "I expected you at 12:05. You've been here the whole time?" I stammered, my world tilting on its axis. "Under his feet? For 28 years? "Not under his feet," she said, gesturing to the screens. "In his pockets, in his servers, in his soul. He thought he was hiding me here to keep his secret safe. He didn't realize that by keeping me in the foundation, I became the one controlling the house." She stood up, walking toward me. She wasn't a victim. She looked like a general. "But he's coming back, Sloane. And he's bringing the police. He's going to frame us both for the fraud he committed. We have exactly 10 minutes to finish what I started the day you were born. Suddenly, the house above us shook. A car had just slammed through the front gates. Richard was home, and he wasn't alone. The ceiling groaned as the front doors above us were kicked open. I could hear his voice. Not the voice of a father, but the roar of a man watching his empire turn to dust. "Search every room!" Richard screamed. "If she's here, she's in the study. Check the cellar." Elena didn't flinch. She turned back to the wall of monitors, her fingers flying across a glass keyboard. "He's brought the city police, Sloane. But they aren't here for him. He's filed a report claiming you and Martha have been embezzling from the trust for years. He's going to play the grieving, betrayed husband one last time." "How can you be so calm?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "He's right above us." "Because," Elena said, looking at me with a sharp, piercing intensity, "I didn't spend 28 years in a basement just to hide. I spent 28 years building a digital guillotine, and tonight, you're the one who gets to pull the rope." She pointed to a single, glowing red button on the center console. "What does it do?" I whispered. "It releases the Vane protocol," she explained. "Every document, every recorded threat, every illegal wire transfer he forced your mother, Martha, to sign. It all gets sent simultaneously to the FBI, the SEC, and the evening news. But more importantly, it transfers every cent of the Sterling liquid assets into a blind trust that only you can access. He won't just be a criminal, Sloane. He'll be a pauper." The sound of heavy boots hit the basement stairs. They were at the wine cellar door. "Sloane!" My father's voice was muffled by the concrete, but the venom was unmistakable. "I know you're in there. I know about the room. You think you can replace me? You're a Sterling. You're nothing without my name." I looked at the woman who had given me life, and then I looked at the monitors showing the man who had tried to steal it. "I'm not a Sterling," I said, my voice finally finding a cold, hard edge. "I'm a Vane." I reached for the button, but before I could press it, the hydraulic door began to hiss. He had the override code. The wall started to slide back. My father stood there, flanked by 2 officers who looked confused, their guns drawn but lowered. Richard was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, pointing a shaking finger at me. "There she is!" he shouted at the officers. "The girl stole the corporate ledgers. She's been working with this squatter." He looked at Elena, and for a second I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated terror in his eyes. He hadn't seen her in decades. To him, she was a ghost he'd successfully buried. Seeing her standing there, healthy and defiant, was his worst nightmare realized. "Hello, Richard," Elena said softly. "You look tired." "Shut up!" he shrieked. "Officers, arrest them, now!" The police moved forward, but I didn't back down. I held the silver key in one hand and hovered my other hand over the red button. "Wait," I told the officers. "Before you arrest anyone, you might want to look at the screens." At that exact moment, every monitor in the room shifted. They stopped showing data and started playing a video. It was the footage from the dining room last Thanksgiving. The hidden cameras Elena had installed years ago had caught everything. Not just the grounding, but the conversation afterward where Richard admitted to the board members that he was using the city deal to cover his tracks. My father's jaw dropped. The officers stopped in their tracks, their eyes glued to the screens. That's a deep fake," Richard stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of green. "It's a setup." "The metadata doesn't lie, Dad," I said, "and neither does the paper trail." I looked at Elena. She nodded. I didn't just press the button. I slammed it. The moment my palm hit that button, the world changed. The room filled with a low-frequency hum, the sound of millions of terabytes of data screaming across the globe. On the monitors, we watched in real time as the Sterling development stock price didn't just dip, it entered a freefall. What did you do? My father whispered, his voice sounding small and hollow in the high-tech vault. I ended it, Richard, Elena said, stepping forward into the light. I sent the truth to everyone you ever tried to impress. Every bank, every partner, every person you ever looked down on. They all know now. You aren't a titan. You're a parasite. My father's phone began to explode with notifications. The officers behind him looked at their own handheld radios as the dispatchers began to scream. The orders had changed. The FBI had just issued an emergency freeze on all Sterling assets. The lead officer looked at my father, then at the video still playing on the loop, the one where Richard laughed about bleeding the pension funds dry. Richard Sterling, the officer said, his voice cold. Hands behind your back. Now. No, you don't understand, Richard shrieked, backing away into the wine racks. I'm the chairman. I built this city. You didn't build anything, I said, stepping toward him. You just sat in a chair my mother designed and used my grandmother's money to buy a bigger ego. You grounded me because you were afraid I'd grow up and see you for what you really are. Well, Dad, I'm grown up, and you're finished. As the handcuffs clicked shut over his wrists, the man who had terrified me for 28 years finally broke. He didn't go out like a villain in a movie. He went out crying, begging the officers to be careful with his jacket, begging me to tell them it was all a mistake. I watched them lead him out of the basement, up the stairs and out of the house I now owned. I watched the flashing blue and red lights through the cellar windows until the sirens faded into the distance. 1 month later, the name Sterling was stripped from the skyscraper downtown. We renamed the firm Vane & Associate Architects. Martha, the woman who raised me, didn't go to jail. With the evidence Elena and I provided, she was granted full immunity as a victim of long-term coercion. She moved into a quiet cottage on the coast, away from the mahogany tables and the fake smiles. Elena and I, we're still getting to know each other. You can't make up for 28 years in a month, but we're starting with the foundations. We're rebuilding the company, paying back every cent Richard stole from the workers, and proving that a legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn through integrity. I used to be afraid of my father's voice. I used to think that being grounded meant I had no power. But I learned that sometimes, being forced to stay still is exactly what you need to see the cracks in the walls. Richard Sterling thought he was the architect of my life. He forgot that I'm the one who knows how to read the blueprints. What a ride, right? If you think Sloane did the right thing by taking down the empire to save the truth, let me know in the comments. And before you go, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who loves a good comeback, and subscribe to Silent Revenge Lab for more stories of justice served cold. See you in the next one.